teams that are going to be competing in tonight's game between USC and Stanford. I think two of the best teams in the country that are hot teams and doing well. These teams will also, as the 10th and 12th ranked teams in the country, also feature some of the most exciting players in the country this year. All eyes have been on Bryce Love as a Heisman candidate most of the season, and Sam Darnold and some of the other talented players on USC's team are also going to be a big attraction tonight, not just for fans here, but fans that are watching across the country. This has been a strong year for the Pac-12 with 9 teams making bowl games, 4 teams ranked in the top 25 now. It's certainly been a year where the depth and parity in the league have been showcased. And we get to finish our season in a fabulous way on one of the best stages and platforms for college football and football more generally here in partnership with the 49ers and Levi's Stadium. It's great to have this platform. I know the players are excited to be here, to have the chance to be in the locker rooms, on the field, in this environment. It's really terrific. And I want to thank our partners at the 49ers, City of Santa Clara, Levi's Stadium, for being great hosts. We, earlier this year, had a chance to announce that we're going to be partners here in playing the game here at least through 2019. We've got options beyond that. So we're delighted that we've got the continuity of the event here for a while to keep building on the event. And I also want to thank some of the other partners that go into making this not only a great event, but an event that is picking up momentum and steam. Certainly it is from the sponsor partner community. I think just earlier today, we announced, in addition to 76, who's been the presenting sponsor the second year, Maui Jim has just signed on as a new sponsor. Geico has renewed their sponsorship. Then we've got more sponsors this year than we've had any other year. So the event continues to grow in stature, which I'm delighted about. And very optimistic about the future of Pac-12 football. We continue to be a destination that attracts some of the best coaches, some of the best players. There's a lot of excitement, and our schools continue to make investments. News this week about Chip Kelly coming back to the league after a lot of speculation around a lot of other schools, I think is another reinforcing confirmation of that. So a lot to look forward to as we go to the future. The only other thing I'd like to touch upon today before I take your questions is some of the things we've been doing around innovation. Something the conference prides itself on, given our geographic location, the relationships we have. Not only are a lot of pregame events, postgame events being streamed live on Facebook Live, like this press conference, but we're going to be experimenting, one of the first sporting events to experiment with Google's new 180-degree virtual reality product. Events around the game and the game are actually going to be shot using this technology, and soon after the game, fans are going to be able to experience this game via virtual reality 180-degree camera on the Pac-12's YouTube channel. So that's something to look out for. We've also piloted this season with shortened game lengths. Our average game last season was 3 hours and 26 minutes. I've set out an objective over time. I'd like to get our games to about 3 hours. We made some steps this year to experiment with shortened half times at some games. At some games that were on the Pac-12 networks, we went with reduced commercial formats and traded some on-screen branding during the competition for 30-second TV timeouts. And we also pushed the envelope to get kickoff times closer to the top of the hour, all designed to not only shorten the game length, but shorten the telecast windows. And I think you'll see from a press release we sent out, we had some positive results from that in terms of shortening the game length and the telecast windows, down to, on average, where we did these experiments, under 3 hours and 15 minutes. So we made some progress in that regard. We're going to continue to experiment at more Pac-12 games going forward. I've been able to share these results with colleagues from other conferences, so hopefully they try some of these elements as well. And we're going to work closely with the Football Rules Committee to see what can be done next in terms of the rules of the game, which is really what you need to look at next beyond game management to try to make any significant reductions in the game length. So a lot going on, and coming off a great year and looking forward to the future. Appreciate you all that are here supporting this event, and happy to take any questions that you have.
You had to prioritize between a playoff team and parity. How would you?
I can't want both. From a commissioner's perspective, I'd say long term, you want depth and competitive teams. I like having a lot of markets and a lot of universities that are rewarded for the investments they've made. If you look at over the last, for those of you that followed the conference for a while, every single one of our schools has made significant investments in facilities, coaches, coaching staffs, and I think it's a very healthy sign for any league to have depth and parity. So I'd say that's the ultimate measure of health from my perspective. Given that we've got a playoff system with only 4 teams, but there's 5 major conferences and independents, I don't think that would be the ultimate measure that we should look for. But certainly it's important. We'd like to see teams in the playoff. I think we have teams that have a shot and deserving of consideration this year as well. But whether they make it or not, I think we're in a good place. We will have our fair share of teams over time that are in the playoff, and certainly want to win national championships as well.
I wanted to ask a basketball question, if I could, involving the UCLA shoplifting incident in China. Since that happened prior to the Pac-12 China game and became such an international kind of ordeal, I was wondering, did the Pac-12 have any discussions with UCLA as far as having input in the length of the suspension? Have you talked to Dan Guerrero about that? Have you been involved with that in any way?
Informally. So I speak to the chancellor and I speak to the athletics director, but we don't have any formal role in their discipline process because the incident is something that took place away from the competition. Once they got back to campus and the school's trying to decide what the ultimate discipline should be, it's not something that the Pac-12 would officially be involved in.
Do you have any thoughts on what would be an appropriate suspension for those players?
Not something I'd speculate on.
Yeah, right here, Larry.
Oh, sorry. Hi.
If there was an 8-team playoff, tonight's game would feel a little bit more important. If you'd be playing for a shot to go as things sit, neither team's probably going to get in. Would you be in favor of the college football system moving to an 8-team field?
I have not been in favor of that. I think as we balance the importance of the bowls, the traditions that the Pac-12 has with the Rose Bowl and others, I think it's been great for college football that we've moved to a playoff. But I think 4 is the right number. And it was designed so we have fewer spots than we have conferences. So we always know there'll be years where certain conferences don't have a team in.
And the second question I was, 2020 is when this game could open up and move to a different location. Have you started discussing that with places like Las Vegas or Los Angeles that are both building new stadiums?
Yeah, we're certainly aware that there are some exciting developments happening in the West Coast when it comes to football and new facilities, and I think that's great news for football generally, but we are delighted with our partnership here. It's just in the last year that we extended it through 19, and we have an option for 2020, and I think as we get closer to that, we'll talk to the 49ers and Levi's and consider all the options, but we couldn't be happier here.
He was kind of playing off my question. The optics on this game nationally have never been very good. There are tarpon seats tonight. How do you made the basketball work in Vegas? How can you make the football work like you made the basketball work?
Well, we're happy with this event. I mean, I think it looks good on TV. Of course, we'd love it to be full, but I think it's a strong attendance for our game. I think there are always going to be challenges with neutral site games, especially Friday night games. I think we understand that. So we've been happy. Our teams have been very happy with it here. We look at the overall experience. We'll sit down. If we have other options to consider at the appropriate time, we'll sit down and look at it.
How about changing the day of the week? The Friday night's an issue. How about changing the day of the week?
So what we found is in our new TV contracts, Fox wanted to broadcast it Friday night, given other commitments they had Saturday. ESPN had the option, Friday night or Saturday. And what we found in the first few years of doing the event is that the ratings are significantly higher on Friday night than they are on Saturday. I think, an order of magnitude of certain years 2.5 times, sometimes a little less, sometimes a little more, up to 3 times the audience. And that's got to do with a bunch of variables, the significance of the game nationally, but importantly, the competition you're up against. I mean, there are several other championship games on Saturday. So what we found, importantly what our broadcast partners have found, because it's at their option when the game is played, is that the audience is much bigger. So in that regard, we've got multiple objectives we're trying to balance in terms of the student athlete experience, the fan experience, and audience. But the audience you get for this game, is as significant as any criteria. We want national relevance. We want as wide an audience focused on our two best teams as possible. So the fact that you get such stronger ratings being the main game in town on a Friday night on a major broadcaster like ESPN tonight has been the determining factor for ESPN and Fox.
Hey, Larry. Tom Fitzgerald, San Francisco Chronicle. Is there any thing that the Pac-12 and the Big Ten can do to put pressure on the ACC, SEC to play a 9-games conference schedule to make the playing field a little bit more fair when it comes to the college football playoff?
Yeah, there's nothing about our system that gives us any leverage or pressure points the way the system was designed. I mean, you only have 12 regular season games as it is. Every league's different in terms of their strength in any given year, the quality of the non-conference opponents, when those games take place, and how many conference games there are, as you point out, compared to non-conference. There are a lot of variables involved. And you identify one of them, whether it's 9 conference games or 10, but there are other things that are as important. And it's the reason we have a committee that's looking at these things, because it's not that easy to compare teams because not a lot of data points. But to come back to your question, there's nothing about the way the college football playoff was designed that mandated similar scheduling. So it's just the nature of the system. Having said that, I think leagues are, there has been a trend toward 9 games. We were the first, and now you see the Big 12 doing it and the Big 10 doing it. And I think the committee's done a very good job of signaling that strength of schedule matters, all things being near equal.
Hey, Larry,
Chris?
you mentioned before, 5 conferences for 4 spots is a problem. If you don't make it in this year, you'll be 2 for 4 in the first 4 years. Is that a good ratio for you? I mean, over the course of 12 years, is that an acceptable ratio, 50% of the time getting a team to the playoff, or would that bother you?
I don't think it bothers me at this point in time. I think if we get to year 10 or 12, and that's a trend, we might feel differently about it. But I think our league's very strong. I think it's deep. I mean, there are some particular circumstances that went into teams having 2 losses rather than 1 loss this year that were tough. But it's very elusive and hard challenge to be one of the top 4 teams making the playoffs. So when I look across at the overall strength of our programs, the coaches that we have, the facilities that we have, the student athletes that we're recruiting, I've got no reason to believe Pac-12 football isn't in a great place.
As a follow-up, there's a potential here for 3 2-loss conference champions. Ohio State could be a 2-loss champion, TCU, and USC. USC is not being discussed is not in that discussion right now. At least it's not nationally. Why is that?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, first of all, I think they are in the discussion. They're in the discussion that matters, which is the discussion of the committee. So I know that because we talked to the committee. And I think USC, depending on if they are to win the game in impressive fashion tonight, I think they've got a very, very strong resume. And they've got a great case for the playoff, depending on what happens elsewhere, but certainly against any other 2-loss team. If the committee is looking at 2-loss teams, depending on what happens elsewhere, I think they'll have a very strong case. They had, they played 12 games in a row. Their 2 losses were away. They were away at Notre Dame, who had a bye the week before by design. They were away on a Friday night in Washington State. Against Notre Dame, they had 7 players that were injured and out. Against Washington State, they had at least 5. Of the 7 that were out against Notre Dame, 4 of them are back tonight playing, including Stephen Carr, I think, was one of their most prolific offensive players. was out and is now back. These are all things that matter. The other two spots behind Ohio State, I think, in the current standings. But I think the team that the committee is going to see play tonight is different than the team that suffered their 2 losses due to injuries. When you look at strength of schedule, I don't think there's any other 2-loss team in consideration that's got the strength of schedule numbers that USC has. Western Michigan, Texas, Notre Dame. They had some strong, very notable non-conference games. And if you look at any of the numbers, any of the services that mention strength of schedule, you see USC right up there. So I actually think they've got a very, very compelling case, depending on the outcome tonight and depending on what happens elsewhere.
So when you mentioned the USC-Washington State loss this season with 3 different teams that were sort of in the mix, with USC going to Washington State going to Cal, Washington going to Stanford, were all Friday nights on short rest. How much is that going to be taken into consideration for scheduling moving forward?
Yeah, it's something that got a lot of conversation over the last couple of months as we went through the process to prepare a 2018 schedule. So like we do every year, we go through a process where we decide, are we going to change any of the scheduling parameters that we have before putting together different versions of what a calendar might look like and getting the input from our TV partners. I mean, we're always going to have Thursday and Friday night games to start with because those are contractual obligations to our broadcast partners. And we've got, about 10 different scheduling parameters that get put into the computer with an outside consultant that we work with that kicks out against all those parameters some different schedule options. This year, one of the priorities was looking at those scenarios, and we added, through the process we go through, consulting with our athletics directors, and ultimately, they vote to change the parameters. We added a parameter that says you cannot schedule a team to play a Friday night road game after a Saturday road game. So it is something that got a little consideration. It's, if you look at the losses within our conference and nationally, of the top 20, 25 teams, there's a very high number that happen on the road on short weeks. So I think that weighed heavily on those in the conference office and on our campuses that discussed this and decided to change the parameters.
Following up on that one, USC, had they not had the Friday night game, might be 11-1, and where does that put it? Because you did it, they had the Friday night road game following the road game the week before last year, also this year. Should the Pac-12 maybe picked up on that a little sooner? And because you got rid of it for next year, would you have looking back, would you have liked to have gotten rid of it for this year?
Oh, hindsight's 20/20. If we could re-engineer some things, I mean, there would probably be a long list of things that we'd do differently, or but no one's got the benefit of doing that.
So did people not understand that a Friday game on the road following a road game the week before would be more of a difficult?
All I can tell you is that has not been an issue in our conference previously. When we've sat down every year as we do to review the schedule from the year before, the coming year, are there any changes we want to make? And it hasn't up till now, but this year it did. And USC had the double whammy of that scenario plus 12 in a row. That was a very, very tough road, especially for a team with a tough non-conference schedule where they suffered a lot of injuries, especially coming out of the Texas game. So they had a very, very tough road. I'm hoping this is something the committee does take into account. I know we've certainly made the case, and is something that will get discussed. If you compare, we're going to be in a scenario, we may be in a scenario where there's a lot of teams in consideration for the last spots for the playoff that have similar looking records. And when that's the case, there are a bunch of factors that are supposed to kick in. Who won a conference championship? It's number one on that list. Head-to-head, strength of schedule. And I think if USC is a 2-loss conference champion, given their strength of schedule numbers and given what I believe are mitigating factors around some of the losses, and other teams may have mitigating factors too, but If you look at the losses and the injuries that they had and the difficulty of their schedule, I think they've got a very, very compelling case.
There are two schools in the conference who combined to pay about $24 million in buyout money to two coaches. Do you have any conversations with people at the different campuses about that concept of paying that much money to someone to go away?
I don't. Those aren't conversations that the schools have consulted me or the conference on.
Larry, I think next year there are 6 or 7 Friday games. Do you have any options with Fox to make sure you avoid a repeat of the games getting bumped because of the truck races to FS2?
Yeah, I didn't want to wait till the end of the season. I was actually in China when it happened this year, and phone was lighting up about it. I was very, very disappointed in what happened, and raised it with the president of Fox. I don't think a Pac-12 football game should ever be delayed for a truck race, and I think we should have better options. But we also realize, put the truck racing from a different part of the country aside. We also know that there's always going to be situations where something runs longer or there's weather, and you might have to join a game in progress. So we get that. But what I want to make sure is that we have, strong alternatives and overflow channels where fans can go that have similar distribution to the main channel they'd be watching it on. So, FS2. Unfortunately, at this point, doesn't have near the distribution that Fox or FS1 has. So, we've told Fox that's not acceptable from our point of view, and we're going to be talking to them in the off season about other alternatives for next season.
Hey, Larry.
Scott?
This is your showcase event. Is it a good idea to have a team on a bye playing a team that's playing its second game in 6 days?
This is a year where for USC, on the one hand, they were punished, you could say, by having to play 12 in a row. And, there was a lot of discussion around, have they been treated unfairly during the regular season. Now that they're in the championship game, right, it's switched to, are they getting some unfair benefit? So, no one knew, of course, in the beginning of the season whether they'd make the championship game or not. It's just the way the schedule worked out. No one knows who's going to make the championship game, and the schedule doesn't get designed with that in mind, trying to figure that out or game it. So we have had a few years where there've been 12 in a row, and there've been other teams in the situation. So I think it just goes with the territory, unfortunately.
Larry, one more thing. You discussed this earlier. So you think a 2-loss conference champion should get priority over a 1-loss team that did not win a conference? Of course, I'm speaking about Alabama here, but in general, is that your theory and philosophy?
I would say in this year, yes. But I don't think that's not a rule that I would say is necessarily the case every year. The committee made a decision last year, for example, I think, that a 1-loss non-champion deserved to be in the playoff. So the committee has the ability to make that decision, but I think what you heard Kirby Hocutt, the chair of the committee last year, say, if it's clear, if it's unequivocal that non-champion is really one of the 4 best teams in the country, that's a situation where the committee would make that choice. In a situation where sometimes they use the word cluster, where it's not unequivocally clear, if there are a bunch of teams, that might look similar, that's when the conference champion issue, amongst others, kicks in as a determinative factor. That's my understanding of the way it's supposed to work. So I'd say when I look at the landscape this year, I don't think there's a 1-loss non-champion out there that would trump a two-loss champion from the Pac-12 at least.
Kind of following up on Bill's question, I mean, as a commissioner, do you study the SEC in a way where you say, how do they do it? When you look at, there's never ever a discussion about whether they're going to get 1; it's whether they're going to get 2. they have 3 teams playing for 1 or 2 spots this year, in a year where the conference below those 3 teams was down, I would say. I mean, how do you assess that situation, or do you just think that's the system we're in, or are they doing something infinitely better than everyone else?
Yeah, we spend most of our time focused on our own league, but of course look at what others are doing, and you know it raises conversations all the time. So you know every couple of years we'll discuss, should we be playing 9 games versus 8 games in the conference? Should we put a non-conference week later in the season where schools, if they wanted to, could schedule, let's call it a weaker opponent, to give the players some break. And we've decided not to, that for a variety of reasons, we prefer playing each other more. We prefer having, with the exception of Notre Dame, which is a grandfathered historical situation where we do have a non-conference Notre Dame game later in the season. We prefer to play non-conference at the beginning of the year and then have the conference season. But these things do get revisited, regularly. I mean, we've got new coaches coming in and out of the league all the time, new athletics directors, and I think we stress test these things every few years.
Can I follow up? So last question. There's nothing in the contracts with ESPN and Fox that would prevent you from scheduling Sacramento State in the middle of November?
No.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.